Let's head to America, where the mighty media establishment has abandoned its role of holding presidents to account and instead has collectively opted to sycophantically celebrate every utterance from Joe Biden. No matter how bumbling, incoherent, or blatantly false the comments may be. Now, one of the worst offenders is the New York Times, which has deployed its presidential stenographers to rewrite history when it comes to the pandemic and, importantly, vaccine production. And our national broadcaster here in Australia is also guilty of spreading false information. But before we get to that, let's listen to Joe Biden himself shortly after taking office, describing the vaccine rollout under President Trump as being a dismal failure.
But the vaccine rollout in the United States has been a dismal failure thus far.
Then forgetful Joe floated his bold 5-point plan to administer 100 shots in the first 100 days.
And in today's briefing, we discussed 5 things. 5 things we'll do in an attempt to turn things around. 5 things to turn frustration into motivation. 5 things to help us meet our goal of 100 million shots by the end of our first 100 days in office.
Bold plan indeed. The only problem is when he said these comments earlier in the year, Americans were already getting vaccinated at a rate of 1 million shots a day, which means his ambitious targets were statistically already on track to be achieved and potentially exceeded under Trump's plan. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this report by ABC News America.
For his first 100 days in office, Biden setting the goal of administering 100 million vaccine doses. His administration touting their plan as ambitious, but the previous administration was already on par with that pace, recently hitting the milestone of vaccinating 1 million people per day.
But back here in Australia, our ABC Newsradio ran Biden's false claims completely unchallenged.
The US is on pace to exceed Biden's goal of administering 100 million vaccine doses in his first 100 days in office, a key commitment when he took the job. He also took the opportunity to take a swipe at his predecessor, saying he was left with no comprehensive plan to vaccinate most of the country.
When I took office just 3 weeks ago, this country did not have a plan or enough vaccines or people to vaccinate Americans. All Americans, any time, at any point in 2021.
If Donald Trump had entered office making such claims, he would have been, quite rightly, blasted by the left-wing media both here in Australia and the United States. But it appears the ABC has no problems airing false claims when the great Joe Biden is responsible. Now, in reality, Trump copped a fair bit of criticism for introducing Operation Warp Speed due to vaccine safety concerns. But today, even the most partisan commentators now admit that it undoubtedly aided in the speedy production of the vaccines. Joe Biden not only ignored the sheer miracle of how quickly the Trump administration plan produced the vaccines, he blatantly claimed credit for Trump's achievements and described the work of countless scientists, medical experts, and health officials as being nothing more than a dismal failure. It was a lie that should have been torn apart by any journalist of integrity. Instead, the New York Times, much like the ABC, has continued covering up for Joe Biden. This week, the Times reports that it was Biden who got the vaccine rollout humming, while Trump, he played a supporting role in the background. Article author and Biden stenographer Sharon Lafreniere does begrudgingly admit that Trump deserves praise for his efforts, but also writes it is Biden and his staffers who fostered such a positive relationship with vaccine companies that resulted in such a successful rollout. Now, Biden undoubtedly deserves praise for continuing the rapid trajectory set in place by the previous administration. Daily deaths and new cases are plummeting, and the percentage of vulnerable Americans who have been vaccinated grows every day. The problem is that Biden has decided to take full credit for what has very much been a group effort. We are now several months into the new administration, and while Biden is entitled to claim credit for his achievements, he is not entitled to keep blaming a previous administration and lie to the American people. Any normal media company would criticise Biden for doing this, but then again, is anyone really surprised? Louise, what do you make of it? Do you think that the media, both here and internationally, do you think they're running a little bit of a protection racket for Biden?
Oh, it's still on the honeymoon period for him, absolutely. I mean, to absolutely ignore Operation Warp Speed and what it did for the American people is just outrageous. And if he truly wants to unite the US, he needs to give credit where credit is due, and that credit actually rests with the Trump administration. It's also interesting to note that Moderna, about a month into Biden's administration, Moderna announced they were about 200 million doses ahead of their production process because they got faster at actually producing them. So we can't claim credit for that either. That's down to the pharma companies. So, yeah, it's amazing that he's just sort of said, you know, it's all on me, nothing to do with Trump.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And Rebecca, the national broadcaster, always very quick to preach about misinformation and how it would never do that. But in this situation, completely unchallenged, they're broadcasting what is essentially a lie and misinformation.
Well, if only I could say I was surprised. And look, I totally agree with what Louise said. With one exception, I would say the media isn't in the honeymoon phase with Biden. These are old married couple. These are an old married couple. I mean, this has been going on for so long. As we said on an earlier program, you know, a lot of the people who are now advising Biden stepped out of media jobs where they'd been warehoused for the last 4 years during Trump and where they kind of endlessly criticised Trump. And I think what we see, yes, the national broadcaster picks up exactly in lockstep with the position of this left-leaning media in the United States, with CNN, with the New York Times, with the Washington Post, and, you know, will ignore. I mean, the Washington Post finally managed to correct a headline that it had put up where it was completely had made up a quote about Trump, put it in the headline, you know, but we don't even see that covered, I think, in the national broadcaster. A separate issue that we see Miranda Devine picking up today, New York Times and the Washington Post will not touch the issue of a crisis on the southern border, all of this administration's creation in the United States. And so it's just a non-issue. So very troubling times.
Well said. And Louise, I guess a lot of politicians, when they first take office, they are entitled, as you said, to that honeymoon period. Do you have any faith that will dissipate?
From what I've seen so far, and to Rebecca's point, no, I don't. I just think the love-in will continue, unfortunately, which sort of, it's a bad way for a media to operate in a democratic society. They need to be prosecuting the arguments and actually getting beneath the minutiae to see what's going on with the administration.